Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage Errant Book 4, The Lost City of Ithos, chapters 24 through 27, Lich City, Tea in the Park, The Fallen Moon, and Upriver. In these chapters, I had asked last episode to please let me know what a lich is, and then the next chapter starts with somebody who thinks the exact thing I did. I'm so delighted to have this author see me this clearly. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode, and Dan is also here in the chat, traveling from the usual North Carolina to the West Coast, so thank you for being here, because I know that that is not easy. I am delighted, you guys. Hugh literally says to Alustin, "Aren't liches undead skeleton mages?" And if that isn't a more succinct way of saying what I said last episode, I don't know what is. Truly, it was like he read my mind. And I am really curious. I don't know if anybody is going to have an answer to this, or if it's something that, I would have to pick up via experience. But, I haven't consumed a ton of certain types of media. I have read a fair amount of science fiction and fantasy in the sense that I have caught like major series and stuff like that. But there are a lot of people who do a ton of reading or a ton of watching sort of lesser known, or at least not, top 10 television shows. So there are many times where, even though I do this for a living and you'd really think I would know more, I find myself being taught that XYZ is a trope, and I didn't realize it was a trope because I haven't consumed enough for this to come up multiple times, or I haven't really made the connection with certain other series where maybe it's kind of obvious once you're looking for it that this is a trope, but I didn't pick it up at the time. And so the definition that Alustin gives us of what a lich is, a lich is, simply speaking, a mage who has imbued their entire consciousness into a location, or more precisely, a massive enchanted construct known as a demesne. And I am really curious whether or not this is what liches tend to be in fiction in general. If this is a thing that is in other series that you've come across, if this tends to be, if this is like one of those things like a fairy where it's just a name and people do kind of whatever they feel like with it. You know what I'm saying? So, because I think that this is a really neat idea. And there are times where I want to give authors total credit for something, and then I'll find out later it's like a whole thing. For example, I was giving Will White credit for the magic system in his universe, but that's just called cultivation magic, and it is an entire genre of magic that, because I'm an ignorant American, I didn't know about. So for me, it was brand new and really exciting, and for other people, they were like, yawn, we've seen this before. Well, not necessarily, because those books are super fun, but you know what I'm saying. So anyway, I'm just really curious about this concept and whether it is something specific to these books or if it is kind of accepted. I've never read, I don't think, a single other series where a lich is in play at all. So I'm really running blind on that. But it's not like it matters. I'm just really curious. So this is a really cool idea. And basically, he says a fortress is about the smallest size that they can use, because it has to be a place large enough that it can sustain an entire living mind. And if you choose something too small, you lose your fucking brains. And that is what we saw in the POV, like the flashback that Archer was in, where some Lich had tried to make their ship a demine. And they had gone crazy. And we don't get like a ton of detail of exactly how that madness manifested. Like, the captain was certainly bloodthirsty, and we know that the Lich was mad, but the captain was an actual person, right? That wasn't like a puppet, the way that Zophor is doing later with the sort of wooden statue thing. Eduardo says, oh, wait, sorry, Dan commented first. Yeah, there are lots of Liches in fiction, mostly the skeletal mage type. Bierce has a pretty unique take on them, though. Eduardo says, whenever I've seen Liches before, they've always been the undead skeleton type. Dan says, it's a D&D thing. Yeah, that's literally the only place that I've seen Liches, and that imagery is, I got it from D&D. David says, this is a take on Liches that I haven't seen elsewhere. Oh, by the way, welcome, David. I don't feel like I've seen your name before. Most commonly, they're a wizard that stores their soul in an external vessel that they hide away to achieve immortality, but also become undead in the process. Ooh, okay. So, that's a neat idea. Like, okay, we'll store our soul in an external vessel, but we're going to make that external vessel hella impressive. That's a really neat idea. All right, Bierce, I see you. Okay. And yeah, he says that, you know, the whole thing is that, let's see, here it is. Liches have to build huge scales to contain a mind. Even a fortress-sized demine is a bit on the small side. And it turns out you can grow them like a demine after you've made it, but it's pretty difficult to do. And there's just not a lot of, like, the way Alestin presents it is, it's just a lot harder to do it that way. So, like, why would you? And I get what he means by why would you, but also some people just are power hungry and will just want more because that's how they work. So, you know, that's why. And Talia asks why anybody would, like, choose a place that's small. And Alestin is like, well, the main reason that a lot of people become Liches is because they're afraid of dying. So they have waited so long to perform the enchantment, which is like, you know, it's a very complex thing and requires a ton of work and a ton of knowledge, that they basically waited till the last second and could only do so much. And he says something like 1 in 10 managed to actually successfully create a demine. I don't remember if that's flat out or if that's without a sponsor, because later on we find out that Kandaron sponsors a ton of Liches, and that this dude, Zophor, did it without a sponsor, which is really remarkable. That's like an unusual thing to come across, and kind of points out how gifted he was. So let's see. Archer says some Liches also try for mobility. Oh, that's why they made their demine a ship, because they were trying to be mobile. Oh, that's interesting. I guess I could see, you know, they were talking about like floating cities and how those aren't super successful. I mean, a ship is certainly going to be more agile than like a whole island if you could create a moving island. Wow, that's got my brain going now. And Alestin's like, yeah, they basically turn into their demine, so they can't leave. That's just not how that works. And they have little avatars of themselves to interact with people, but they're never able to leave the demesne. Those avatars are simply for communication while the folks they need to talk to are in the demesne. So they can't use those avatars to go traveling or carry messages for them. They are dependent entirely on like an external system for that, like any person would be if they're trying to like communicate. And he says, Lichdom is a path to incredible lifespans and incredible power, but it is also effectively a prison. And Hugh notes that he says long lifespans, but not immortality. So, yeah, they go on for thousands of years, but when we find out later, there are some things that can really outdo them and are basically forever. And these dudes don't fall into that category. So I love when he says, you can't blame a mage for wanting to avoid that fate. And Arthur's just like, I sure can. So then we find out a little bit more detail. Their demesne needs to correspond to their affinity, and not all affinities work. It has to be an affinity that can be made into a long-term structure. A fire mage couldn't become a lich, both because it has no solid structure and because there's no way to keep a large enough fire in fuel for long enough. A stone or ice mage could become a lich, and stone liches like Kiata are probably the single most common type. Kiata is so old that no one but him knows whether he was actually a Naga in life. The avatars of liches don't have to have any sort of resemblance to them in life, which is a really fun idea that, like, I could make an avatar of myself that was, like, incredibly hot and just be like, no, this is always what I look like. Yeah, that's definitely me. But I'm thinking about Hugh and how he could be a lich in a crystal city, which sounds awesome. Like, come on, that sounds dope as hell. And when Hugh is like, well, can they do it with more than one affinity? And Hugh, when Alestin is like, you can do that, but it's really rare. And if you make a demesne with only one of your particular affinities out of your multiple, you lose the ones you didn't use to make the demesne, which sucks. That really is like, I mean, I would have to say personally, I guess if you're facing death and this is like the only alternative to keep yourself alive, maybe I could see taking that risk. But otherwise, if you've got multiples and you either have to give them all but one up or risk failing and dying anyway, I just don't really see it for that. I will say, though, the concept of having to be stuck in your city, from where I'm sitting, that doesn't bother me. I am a homebody, and I don't really care about going out if I've got what I need where I'm at. You know, like, it's not like travel isn't interesting and fun, but, you know, people were lamenting not being able to go out and do stuff during the pandemic, and I barely noticed that we were isolating because I lived my whole life isolated, frankly, and I'm fine with that. It doesn't really bother me. And probably an argument could be made that, like, just because it doesn't bother you doesn't mean it's good for your mental health, and that's fair. But I'm just saying, I don't really get, like, stir crazy. I am not somebody who's always wanting to go experimenting and trying new things and going to places. I like that in its doses, and I can live off of one experiment and risk for months and be just fine. So let's see. Oh yeah, here it is. Zophor is fascinating. He actually was born in Rassandus, Sabe. I don't know if you knew that. And Sabe's like, yo, I didn't. I knew he was like an ally, but I didn't know that was why. And Alestin's like, yeah, he's got kind of a soft spot for it, which we find out later. He sure does. And then Alestin says Zophor was born over a century ago into a body he despised. He was a particularly powerful and precocious mage with a mangrove affinity. Given that more specific affinities are more powerful than more general ones, mages with affinities for specific species of plants are powerful indeed when surrounded by their plant. Zophor was absolutely brilliant and began the process of growing his demesne here in Ilso Delta, the largest mangrove forest on all of Anastas, right on top of a small submerged labyrinth. He wasn't much older than you all when he reached an archmage status and began constructing his demesne. Just over 20 years old. And I am really curious if a demesne requires a labyrinth or if he just chose this spot because of a labyrinth. But I have to assume putting your demesne over a labyrinth is a pretty baller fucking move. I mean, that has to come with perks, right? Since he started early for the purposes of gaining a new body rather than trying to escape death later in life, he had far longer to construct his demesne than other liches. He chose the challenging path of growing a living demesne out of the mangroves, which has the advantage of being able to repair and extend itself over time more easily. He has even greater control over his demesne than the average lich, and it would be absolutely foolish for anyone to attack him head on without assembling multiple great powers at the very least. I am just living for this whole concept. I love this so much. I love the idea of somebody who just hates their body and is like, I'm going to find a way out. Well, I don't love that idea because obviously that's fucking awful, but I love that they have this like really cool option, you know? And yeah, Dan says in the chat, the gender dysmorphia allegory is on point here. That was exactly what I was going to say. It's just really like, you know, giving the concept of like transitional surgery. And I really love the idea that like you do it earlier in life and everything is more stable and you just get to make it more what you want it to be. And I also love the idea of it being a demesne made out of a living thing, which means that it's self-repairing and it feels like that's going to lend itself to more power, more stability, more longevity. This whole thing just sounds really, really cool. And they are being like carried, reminder, through the trees on the ship as this discussion is happening. And Hugh is like seeing people glancing over at their ship being carried, but they don't seem impressed. And Hugh has a moment of like, man, we could really just get used to anything, can't we? And I was like, yeah, man, it's a little scary how used to anything we get. And this is when the patron comes up. Most liches have the backing of a great power, a city-state, or a nation, and 9 out of 10 still fail. That's what it is. Kandaron is the leading patron, and Zophor figured out the process entirely on his own and achieved the task single-handedly. People started moving into his demesne before he even finished. I truly love that. I love it. I love it so much. Like, people are getting in on the ground floor. They're going and looking at model homes and giving him feedback and like, you know, I'd really like a pocket door here. Can we? Oh my God. I don't know why this has like grabbed my imagination so much, but I just love this concept so much. And when his transition was complete, he tossed his old body in the river like it was trash, which later he talks to Sabe and says that he kind of regrets doing that. He's like, you know, my body did stuff for me. It wasn't what I wanted, but it tried its best, and I wish I'd paid it with a little bit more respect. And this is the vibe, man. As somebody who personally really struggles with self-image and has always struggled with weight issues, and my body dysmorphia always came from seeing myself as a lot heavier than I actually was, I genuinely would be startled that I would fit into certain clothing, or that, you know, just things would prove to me in like data that I was pretty thin. And I would look in the mirror and I would not see that. It was just not what I was seeing. And I struggled for a long time with like, I gained weight and didn't notice it happening because I thought I has always been fat. So it was this weird, like, no, I've always looked like that sort of disconnect in my mind as I gained weight. And yet I have noticed with like the diet industry, how much we're encouraged to turn our body into an enemy and, you know, like fight our appetite or suppress our appetite or burn fat and like treating our body as if it's constantly betraying us because it likes food that's bad for us or because it doesn't want to exercise and we know we should. And so we're bad or our bodies are bad. And I have really over the past couple of years have been trying to be aware of that like mentality and remind myself that my body isn't my enemy. If anything, I am my body's enemy. My body is doing its fucking best. And I just keep bad talking it. And it's still showing up every day. And it's still doing what it can every day. But do I support it with healthy self-talk or with a nutritious diet and regular exercise? No. And yet I expect something from it that I am not willing to play into. And then I get mad at it for not delivering, which is like your body is like a child's and it's your responsibility to care for it. And you don't do that. And then you get angry at that child for acting out and doing whatever it wants when it's on you to instill that. And if you just ignore it or make it feel bad about itself, there's going to be a complete disconnect there that develops into a really toxic relationship. And guess what? That's what has happened to a lot of us. So anyway, I just like this whole moment where he's talking to Sabe and being like, I kind of wish I had paid my body more respect. I really felt that, you know, and again, I'm working on it. I'm not awesome, but I've certainly come a long way from where I was, and I may be fatter, but I think my brain is healthier. Okay. We find out that salt is the thing that's like mainly exported here and that they're the big market for it. I really like this moment with Hugh and Ava. He is thinking about the economy of this place and the city itself, thinking how cool Ava would probably think it was, and then thinking maybe she's actually been here. I don't know that she hasn't. And suddenly feeling guilty for thinking of her. And he talks to Talia and is like, do you think I shouldn't think about Ava? I probably shouldn't even be asking you if I should think about Ava. I don't know what to do here. I'm a bad boyfriend, huh? And she says it's not healthy to demand that someone you're dating pretend like you're the entirety of their dating history. And I just applaud this so much. It is really crazy to me, the standards that some people have with dating and how you're supposed to like not only never talk about exes, but you aren't meant to be friends with any exes. And like, I get that sometimes people could have shit still going on back and forth with an ex, but if you know a person you're dating, you know whether that's happening. And if you don't trust them to be friends with their ex, then don't date them. That's just as fucking bald as I can put it. If you have those kinds of concerns, just dump them. You shouldn't have those concerns. It just shouldn't, that's not part of a good relationship. So let's see. Oh yeah. We come across the fucking, Gorgons, which all have like different snakes growing out of their heads. And Alestin tells them that they aren't born this way. It's a symbiotic absorption process. Their choice of what snake to bond with is a hugely important one and determines a lot about how they'll fit into Gorgon society. That is wild, and I desperately want to know more about it, but we don't get any more than that. except for that there's a legend that they were created to act as servitors to dragons, which I feel is insulting, but I don't know, you know. And Hugh, I was thinking as soon as we saw these Gorgons, I'm like, I remember something about a, quote, Gorgon incident. And yeah, they are recognizing Alustin, it sure seems like. And then we have a mention of celebrating Talia's birthday. And that comes later. That's in chapter 26. In chapter 25, we have the encounter between Sabe and Talia and members of the Hivathi. That's the name of them, right? And this whole like back and forth between them, it's really kind of, I really enjoy Sabe being like politically clever and one step ahead. And I really love that she's free to do that. And her friends get that that's what's going on, because we have a moment here where the Hivathi is like, the woman who is the leader is trying to challenge Sabe of what, do you even know what you're looking for? Trying to insinuate basically that Alustin doesn't share things, trying to get her to like sow doubt, you know? And Sabe is like, not only do I know where we're going, I know what we're looking for. And she says something about like the burning heart. And this causes the woman to kind of stop for a moment and look unsure of herself. Now we find out the heart burner, that's what it is, not burning heart. And we find out later that this is like nonsense. It's just a thing Sabe threw out there because this lady doesn't know as much as she's pretending she does to throw Sabe off. And Sabe is just like, all right, if we want to play games about knowing more than we do, I'll play that game and I'll play it better than you. And so she says that. And then this lady is like, we're just trying to protect human beings. Let's see, bring peace to the masses and keep them from being constantly swept up in coups and power struggles between the great powers. And Sabe does this thing here where she pretends other people are not her concern and that she doesn't give a shit about human lives. But it's great because in a cheaply written, and when I say cheaply written, I mean a writer who's going for the lowest hanging fruit plot-wise, she would do this and Talia would become concerned and take it kind of seriously and worry about her friend, maybe believing that more than it seems like, and just, you know, it would like eat away at the trust between the two of them. But in this, their friendship is strong enough and Talia understands Sabe well enough that Sabe does this whole like, why should I care about weak people? And Talia is just like, oh, Sabe. She's just saying that. Like, don't worry about it. This isn't what she thinks. It's just, we're playing a little game here. She's playing her game. And I just love that she totally understands that. And there's a whole thing before she like does the, why should I care about weak people, where she's debating how to respond to this assertion that we're just trying to protect folks, and finally comes to the conclusion that if you're debating somebody who has genuine convictions about what they're doing and you see it as wrong, but they actually believe it's the right thing to do, you can win a debate, but that isn't going to change their mind. It's not going to matter. And that you have got to like drive little wedges in their logic and sort of then let it sit and let it fester that you made some good points, and hope that the seed you planted in that little chink grows and breaks it open and that they start to get it. And it just requires a kind of patience that isn't always going to pay off and also doesn't feel that satisfying in the moment, because a lot of us, me included, just want to win the argument. I'm really, really susceptible to this, kids. Like, and it's unsurprising if you listen to the show and how much I love to hear myself talk. I can go like this for a fucking straight hour, 3 hours in a row, and not run out of things to say. I love arguing with people. And it's fucking pointless, like 80% of the time. But I fall for it all the time. And this is like a perfect thing trolls are learning to do, is they don't just say shit and then bounce like they used to. They like trick you into engaging and thinking what you're doing matters, or that they're really listening when they're not. They're not listening. They're just stringing you along, and they're enjoying riling you up. And in the end, when you're dealing with people like that, logic doesn't fucking play into it. So there isn't a way to win. You know, it's like that meme that was circulating a few years ago, which is, it's like arguing like this is like trying to play chess against a pigeon, and the pigeon just flips the chessboard over and shits all over the table. There's no point. So anyway, she gets this lady really off guard and tries to be like, well, if it's only crude power that you respect, we also have the strength in that respect. And Sabe is like, not crude power. I care about the way it's wielded. And y'all don't do a good job with that. So just FYI, Exile, Splinter, and Heartburner are coming for you. And I'm like, oh my God, she's just saying things. She's just saying things. And then here comes Zophor. And he's just sitting there as his little statue self. I am imagining him as a bald wooden statue of Benedict Cumberbatch. I don't know why. I think it's just that high cheekbones and a stern expression are mentioned, and I'm just like, Cumberbatch, that's who it is. And he is like, hey, guys, this seems tense. I feel like something could go badly here, and that would suck. And Sabe immediately is like, you're right. I really shouldn't have let myself get worked up by something so petty. And really is like calling them like small. It's great. I love Sabe in this scene so much. It's like really a moment for her to shine. And Zophor is like, oh, your grandma said that. Really? I wonder who she is, because you look a little familiar. But Sabe's like, yeah, he fucking knows exactly who I am. And he's like, well, why don't you come hang out with me? And, we'll just chat. Later on, she's like, I have a feeling, sir, that you may have had a conversation with a Havathi at the same time as us. And he's like, maybe I did. But at this point, he has this tea that he's giving them, and it's like a fermented tea, which I kept thinking of kombucha, which I'm a massive fan of kombucha. I love it, but I understand why so many people don't like it. And this, like, he asks Sabe, do you really believe what you said about not giving a shit about little people, basically? And Talia chimes in and is like, Clan Castus has a reputation. And that is that we are belligerent barbarians. And we kind of just play that up because it is easy to predict what people think we're going to do based on that reputation. And they think that it's earned and reliable. So we can manipulate them extremely easily because we understand that they overestimate how good we're going to be in battle, or they underestimate how smart we are. And I have a feeling Sabe may be playing up something for her own family's reputation. And I really appreciated that Sabe has a moment here of worrying when Talia starts speaking that she's going to like make a fool of herself. And I liked that Talia proved her so wrong. And I hope that Sabe begins to trust Talia a little bit more, because Talia is implicitly trusting Sabe. She deserves that consideration as well. And that's not to say that Talia doesn't always handle herself well, or that's not to say that Talia always handles herself well. But I don't know. I feel like she can get the tone of a situation. I don't feel like she's ever completely misread the room to the, you know what I'm saying? Like, even when it seemed like asking for the bones of someone's dead lover, even when it seemed like that was really pushing the envelope, it turned out she was right and Indris did not care. So, I don't know. I feel like Talia might not be as bad at this as Sabe thinks she is. And Zophor says, I have to say, like, this whole situation is kind of interesting to me. And, you know, if you're searching for Ithos, I kind of think there's something going on near me, which I'd never expected it would be this close. But I feel like I've seen a lot of folks be really, really concerned about the city returning. And I'm wondering about that. And Sabe's like, yeah, I also am wondering about that. And, you know, they kind of brainstorm a little, like, do you think it's this and that? We find out later what it is. But he says, if great powers are worried about it, I'm worried about it. It's as simple as that. That feels like bad news. And maybe they're cautious and maybe they're conservative after having lived for so long, but they're fucking survivors. And that is something to take into consideration. And there's been weird shit happening. We've had some floods that have come from upstream instead of coming from the ocean, which is where you'd expect that shit to start. And they have been raising the water like several feet, which is already kind of unheard of. And now it's happening really close together, almost daily. And it's coming from Lake Nelu. It's weird because it's a shallow lake, but nobody lives there. And people call it cursed. And Sabe is like, oh, shit. Which, yeah, this feels like it's the thing they're looking for. There it is. And Zophor is like, I probably should have connected this weirdness to everybody looking for Ithos a little bit sooner. I'm a bit embarrassed that I didn't think of it. But then Kandaron and Havath arrived in my demesne. He's agents of Kandaron, not Kandaron himself, herself. But let's see. While the floods awoke quite a lot of curiosity among the citizens of my city, they caused relatively little damage, and scrying into Lake Nelu has seldom had much luck, which I had assumed had to do with its thin ether. And Talia is like, well, didn't you send anybody to check it out? And he's like, well, it gets pretty dangerous the further north you go. And I'm not the only great power out here. Like, there's a mage eater, which we find out later is a tigress, which is super cool out there. And I am loath to waste lives sending my servants after her. I believe... Oh, right. That's right. He then just really transitions into, I believe today is your belated birthday celebration, is it not, Talia? And he gives her some kombucha as a present. And I'm kind of wondering if it's just like, is it just like this tea? Or is it something more? Or is there something else to it? And this is when Sabe is like, I really wonder if you met with the Havathi at the same time. And he says something about how, you remind me of myself when I was young in some ways. You even look a lot like me. And if I were to, you know, offer the Havathi the same information that I offered you, they may have mentioned that they were interested in expanding their borders into my dominion. And this might cause me to want to hinder them by, say, a day, by causing rot in the boats or getting supplies mixed up or whatever. Just for instance. And Zophor then says, Sabe, next time you speak to your grandmother, pass on my regards and thank her for steering her storms clear of my demesne. It was quite thoughtful of her. So we get confirmation that this has been Sabe's grandma this whole time, which is interesting because I thought we were trying to find Ithos, and it seems like if she's sending these storms, then she doesn't want our crew to find Ithos. I don't really get it. Or she's just trying to fuck with the Havathi who are chasing them? I'm not entirely sure. So then we have chapter 26, which is, it starts with the discussion of the Mage Eater being a tigress, and Captain Greffa is just like, I am not calling that thing a great power. And I love Alustin's eventual answer, which is, well, you don't have to call it a great power, but if other powers that are great call it so, that is what it is called. Like, it doesn't need your permission to be what it is, because it has the stamp of approval from other people way higher up the chain than you. And let's see. Sabe says, someone explain how a tiger can kill nearly 100 mages. And Alustin says, same way a tiger kills anything else. Attacks from behind, crushes your neck in a bite. And when Sabe's like, they're not susceptible to magic, Talia says, you can only defend yourself with magic if you get the chance to do it. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. Like, if you just sneak up, unless somebody has a constant sort of shield going around themselves or something, I mean, yeah. And Alustin says that they can tell who mages are, tigers, but cats in general, because they can see your mana reservoirs, which is wild. And Hugh is sort of like, ooh, am I going to get to see that? And he's like, no, that's not a thing for you. But mostly the cats don't care. It's just this particular tiger who got injured badly by a mage decided, fuck mages forever. And it can tell, and so it goes after them. So the Rat Hand stayed for a little dancing. Talia monopolized Hugh for most of the evening, otherwise only dancing with Arthur and Godric once each. Sabe danced mostly with Del, but also took turns with Talon and Yara. And I was like, okay, keeping her aura in, I see. So then we have a conversation here. We get together and we're talking about what happened with, because everybody's giving Talia birthday gifts. We're talking about what happened with the hairpins, because Godric had given those to her as a gift. And before all of this stuff went down, he had intended to give her more of them because she had used them. And then, they seemed to be part of why she lost her hair, and he felt bad about it and was like, okay, maybe I should rethink this. And Hugh has figured out that the ship is being awakened by a warlock, and something is, there is a pact that is being formed. And probably it was giving off that kind of power that could cause a resonance cascade. So it may not have just been his spell book and, the hairpins and everything. That might have been part of it. And this is just making me think that there's a lot about this universe and the tropes that are set up in it that remind me of the Cradle thing, the Cradle series, Cradle thing. And also I covered Will White's other series, not Traveler's Gate. I didn't cover that one. The Dawn and Darkness and Darkness and Dawn. But I can't remember. Elder Empire. That's the name of the series. And there is a character with an awakened ship, in quotes, awakened. I didn't realize like that I should think about that in terms of being pacted and, you know, but it is a really similar idea. And also the more that I like get into this universe and see the way that this world is being built, I can't help but laugh at some of the similarities to like the characters. I wonder at times whether like John Bierce and Will White both were like, all right, so you're going to have a universe with somebody who is an underachiever at magic and thinks they're really bad at it, but then turns out they're really good at it, and also they have a massive power source in comparison to most people, and they're going to get romantically involved with a woman who's a real badass warrior, and they're going to be being trained by a person who is their superior, but they don't fully trust them, and their superior has like a weird vendetta against an old family that did something to their country that was hugely personal, and they basically like really want to get back at them. There is so much that aligns, you know, even like the fact that Alestin has far-seeing, and it just feels like they were each given a sort of prototype listing and they just went in different directions with it. And it's wild how much of a one-to-one I can get. You know, we've got Sabe, who's part of this like royal family, and she's like politically entangled, and that's also sort of Mercy. And then we've got a guy who fights with a hammer and is super strong, and you know, we got like some things happening here. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, the whole thing here ends with the spellbook trying to give Sabe an apology / birthday gift again. 10 pounds of mixed salt and crushed insects. I feel so bad for this poor spellbook. It is really not giving up, but it should. It should give up. So Hugh then gives her this book called Rautha's Ossuary. And he had considered maybe getting her something else because he didn't know if this was a good gift coming from a boyfriend. But I appreciate, you know, like sometimes I can understand feeling like this gift is way too impersonal. And then there are times where you just know them really well and you got them something that they specifically would like and not a traditional boyfriend gift of like, oh, jewelry and flowers. I don't know. Oh, sorry. I just got distracted. Dan is in the chat. He says you do eventually get an explanation for the storms. Cool. And then some of it is just playing YA character tropes too. True. But they are, I mean, you got to admit it's quite a one-to-one, like in a lot of ways. But it's fine. It's just like occasionally a little distracting for me because I've read them so close together. I think that if I weren't reading them one right after the other, or basically concurrently, because I'm going to be picking up the last book, Waybound, next month, I probably wouldn't notice it so much. It's just kind of the fact that the proximity of them is highlighting this. But anyway, we find out that this ossuary is like banned because the dude who created it was a fucking maniac. And essentially, like, he used this method. It says he believed you could calculate moral outcomes mathematically, which led him to decide it was more ethical to remove bones from animals via vivisection than killing them for their bones. He was said to have kept a boneless drake alive in his lab for nearly 2 years at one point in constant agony. which is just hideous. Like, there's a whole thing that later on, Alestin starts talking about the cold mines, and he's like, do you guys really want to know? Because I had nightmares when I found out about these things. And I'm like, no, this is worse. Look, I know that the cold mines are truly awful, but there comes a point where it's like, yeah, just total annihilation, whatever. Leaving things in constant pain and like telling yourself that's the moral thing to do, much scarier. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, so this dude tried to become the first bone lich, and it was going to be like, tens of millions of humans and animals to get the number of bones he was going to need to create that demesne. And Heliothrax, like somebody on the grapevine was like, yo, this guy's going to do this thing. And Heliothrax is the fuck he is. And took care of him and banned the ossuary. And it's like, there's nothing in particular about the ossuary that is like wrong. It's simply who wrote it that's the real problem. So this, for Talia's bone affinity, this is a really valuable thing. And Sabe asks, how did his whole calculating morality thing work? And Alestin says it didn't. I know a lot of people who have tried to like create mathematical morality, and it always winds up coming up with the most fucked up conclusions you can ever think of. And then it says, like, the idea that parents should be allowed to abandon or kill crippled children to make their own lives happier, or that suffering is the greatest enemy and should be defeated by killing all life. And there's also other names for those people. Just saying. So then we have the moment with Hugh where he and Sabe, he talks to her privately. I'm trying to find the spot here because do either of you know what he's up to? Talia asked. Godric shook his head. Archer smiled but refused to say anything. Dan says Chat GPT. I was going to say Nazis. That's what I was going to say. But maybe eventually, Lord knows, the people who actually program Chat GPT may be feeding exactly that sort of bias into it. There was a whole thing the other day that somebody was sharing a screenshot of a question that they asked about an attorney getting married, and the Chat GPT could not comprehend that the attorney might be a woman. It was like an attorney marrying a paralegal, and it was just taken for granted by Chat GPT that the attorney was a man and the paralegal was a woman. And when the person kept trying to be like, why are you assuming the attorney is a man? Chat GPT was just like, what do you mean? Like, he didn't get the question. But anyway, so let's see. Oh, that's right. Alestin's paper tower that lifts them up into the air. This is really, really cool. At one point, they're thinking that like the tower is flying, and Alestin says, no. These things can carry real weight. Like, this is, the power is structurally sound, which is pretty fun. So they stand and stare into the dark, and then there is this golden light that begins to show. And it's really cool. It turns out to be algae, that's like bioluminescent. And the delta channels were outlined brilliantly, and Talia could see how they slowly converged, where dry land started to appear in larger quantities to the north. And they just watch it gently shift, which sounds like it would be so soothing, honestly. And I appreciate that she gets irritated when Alestin has to like explain it to them, because he has a hard time dealing with silence. He doesn't like it. And it makes sense that Talia would be thinking about that, because when she and Hugh are together, they spend a lot of time just sitting next to each other and not saying anything. Like, they're both very comfortable with silence. And then there's this huge creature named Ithos that looks like a moon that's like rising up and translucent. Its hundreds of tentacles reached nearly down to the treetops, and lightning occasionally crackled between them. The great jellyfish lunged halfway out of the thunderstorm, but then seemed to stall. Even from this distance, Talia could see a great wind spring up, one that tore entire branches off the tree below it and slowly forced the immense creature back into the storm. And Alustin says that's Ephyris, the fallen moon. It showed up in southeastern Ithos 300 years ago and has roamed its storms ever since. It's always been one of the most inscrutable great powers, but I've never heard of it coming this far west before. And Sabe's like, yeah, I feel like my grandmother might have something to do with that. Just saying. So then we have chapter 27 and the explanation of what the cold minds are. Now, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to try and jump ahead a little bit, but I do just want to mention that they have to get on another ship for their expedition called the Despondent Toad, which is hilarious. What a name. And the captain of the ship's name is Narsa, and she spits all the time and does that kind of like, to like, ugh, I hate that sound. And she tells them that they're going to have to row sometimes, basically like get ready to work. And the food is bad. Like, the whole thing just sucks, and it's raining all the time. And finally, we have Sabe, and she gets everybody together with Alustin. She asks the crew of the ship to, like, make like a tree, and sets up a ward around them to keep them from being scryed or listened to or anything. And finally goes, so Alustin, you're going to tell us about the coal mines or what, bruh? And he is taken quite off guard. There are times where it feels like he's playing it up, and this is not it. He is genuinely, you can tell, taken by surprise. And is like, how the fuck did you hear about that? And she's like, hi, not the issue. And even Arthur is like, yeah, man, this is fucked up. What the hell? I'm out here risking my life, my son's life. This is clearly important, and you just, weren't going to tell us? Like, what is wrong with you? And Alustin is like, all right, fine. I'm going to tell you, but keep in mind, it's really fucking creepy. So if y'all have nightmares, I don't want to hear about it. And he talks about the ether dense areas and how they are, what spawn demons. And he says that mana reservoirs, he's explaining how that works, he says your mana reservoirs all exist primarily in the ether, though they're anchored to your mind in the physical world. The mind is physical, complicated, but essentially. The mind doesn't normally have any existence outside the brain. And before you ask how we know, the answer is, of course, disgusting, unethical, and terrifying experiments by the Ithonian Empire. Anyway, when you absorb mana from the ether and convert it to your attuned mana, you then transfer it back into the ether, into your mana reservoirs. So, artificial mana reservoirs are etheric constructs that are anchored inside an enchantment. There are a few other types, but, basically, magical tattoos like Talia's, they also partially exist in the ether. His doesn't. His is just, like, attached to a physical, like, pocket in space. there are two main ways universes die. I told you about ether going critical, but the other way is slower and more miserable. Instead of happening over the course of millennia, it happens over the course of countless eons. The universe grows colder and drifts apart, and one by one the stars go out, leaving only a frigid void filled with orphan worlds. These universes are where the cold minds are born. They're similar to liches. Cold minds have moved their existence entirely into the ether. It's traumatic, and individuals who try to do it by themselves always die. But cold minds are birthed when the universes are dying, and they are the composite mind of an entire civilization desperately trying to survive no matter what the cost, which means they are warped forever because their priorities are completely out of whack, because they will sacrifice whatever in order to keep existing. And because these minds are completely separated from a body, they are fucking nuts and don't understand people anymore, and we sure don't understand them. And they also come from like entire civilizations from eons ago, which means they feel completely alien. And they drift from one universe to another, growing crazier and crazier until they can migrate again. And initially, it doesn't change much. There's just a little disturbance in the ether. And then it grows, and after a year, it's like a league wide. And then they really begin to do it. And ice starts to form, and they're draining the heat and energy of that universe. And magic starts to be weird and not work reliably. And then all of these sapient beings in that area begin to go mad. And this begins to grow exponentially at this point, like the affected area. And he says that 1 in 10,000 are able to escape. It's not purposeful. It's just them leaking out of the ether into the minds of living creatures. They don't care about the living creatures. We are not a factor. They just want to live, and they will take whatever is around them to do that in. And the stars begin going out. Galvatron and other experts claim the cold minds awaken for a brief spring during this period. A simulated version of the civilization they once were awakens in a twisted parody of all its former glory, and its inhabitants live out a few months or years of life, unconcerned with and unaware of the costs. But eventually they completely drain the place, and they have to leave and migrate to another universe again and suck that one dry. That is a wild concept. And he's like, I am worried if Imperial Ithos comes back, they may bring something like that with them. He says, the whole point of the exile splinter was to cut them out of the universe and die. And they knew that they couldn't exactly do that permanently. But they never, as he put it, they never intended it to intersect with another universe. However, they don't have a lot of knowledge about other universes. And when they did this, they did not know the cold minds were even a thing. So they didn't realize what they were doing. But when they cut Ithos out, it got sent toward a universe where the cold minds hibernated. It is not mentioned how they know that's what happened. That's what I want to know, is how they found out about the cold mines, since they didn't know, and how they realized that the cold mines were part of the universe where they sent Ithos. And when Talia is like, how do we fight this? He's like, you can't. It's like a force of nature. That's like being like, how do we fight this hurricane? You just either hunker down and get through it by fleeing, or kill yourself, kill everyone you love, and commit suicide. If there's a small blessing, it's that the cold mines cannot travel through labyrinths. Whoever the labyrinth builders were, they were the only ones to have ever found any means of resisting the cold mines. But they've been dead and gone for eons. And I have a feeling we may be finding one of those people eventually. One of those beings. And there's like this, I really do have to wrap up, but Ithos already seemed like enough of a problem if they were going to come back. Them having this that they're dragging along with them. Ooh, no thank you. No thanks. I'm good. Oh boy. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. Hope y'all are enjoying it. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.